story one time at Hillcrest Asylum. Hillcrest Asylum had been abandoned for decades, but its sinister reputation persisted. The locals whispered about the horrors that took place within its walls, where patients were subjected to brutal treatments and experiments. Despite its eerie history, a group of urban explorers, including myself, decided to investigate the old asylum. We arrived at Hillcrest Asylum just before sunset, the dilapidated structure looming over us. The entrance was partially boarded up, but we managed to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with decay and the walls were covered in graffiti. As we ventured deeper, the temperature dropped noticeably, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. So we split into pairs to cover more ground. My partner Jake and I took the left wing, where the treatment rooms were located. As we explored, we heard faint whispers and the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. We tried to brush it off as the building settling, but the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. In one of the treatment rooms, we found an old, rusted wheelchair. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature plummeted. Our flashlights flickered, and we felt an icy breath on our necks. Jake panicked and tried to open the door, but it was stuck. We both heard a low, guttural growl coming from the corner of the room. When we turned our flashlights towards the sound, we saw a shadowy figure standing there, its eyes glowing red. Terrified, we screamed for help. Our friends eventually managed to force the door open, and we stumbled out, shaken and breathless. We fled the asylum, vowing never to return. To this day, I can't shake the memory of those glowing eyes and the malevolent presence in that room. Hillcrest Asylum remains a place of nightmares, and I warn anyone who dares to explore it to stay far away. Story 2 S's: The Disappearance of Emily Caldwell. Emily Caldwell was a bright and ambitious college student who vanished without a trace during her spring break. She had gone on a road trip with her friends to a remote cabin in the woods, eager to unwind after a stressful semester. The trip was supposed to be a fun and relaxing getaway, but it turned into a nightmare that still haunts those involved. On the second night, Emily decided to take a walk by herself to clear her mind. Her friends didn't think much of it, as she often enjoyed solitude. However, when she didn't return after an hour, they grew concerned and began searching for her. They called her name, but there was no response. Panic set in as the hours passed with no sign of Emily. The local authorities were called, and a search party was organized. For days, they combed the area, but there were no clues to her whereabouts. The only thing they found was her phone, lying in the middle of a clearing, with no footprints or signs of a struggle. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Emily's friends were devastated and tormented by guilt. They couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had happened. Months later, strange occurrences began to plague them. They would receive phone calls with static and faint whispers, and they often felt like they were being watched. One friend reported seeing Emily's reflection in a mirror, only for it to vanish when she turned around. The most disturbing incident occurred on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance. Her friends gathered at the cabin to honor her memory, hoping to find some closure. That night, they heard a knock on the door. When they opened it, they found a note written in Emily's handwriting. "I'm still here." They fled the cabin in terror and never returned. Emily Caldwell's disappearance remains unsolved, and the eerie events that followed continue to haunt those who knew her. It's as if her spirit is trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. The mystery of what happened to her in those dark woods remains, a chilling reminder of how quickly joy can turn to horror. Five Rafters. The Cursed Doll of Willow Creek. In a quaint, seemingly idyllic town of Willow Creek, an antique shop held a dark secret. The shop was owned by Mrs. Hawthorne, a kind elderly woman who is known for her eclectic collection of curiosities. Among these treasures was a porcelain doll that had been passed down through her family for generations. The doll was exquisite, with glassy blue eyes and a delicate lace dress, but it had a malevolent history that Hawthorne never spoke of. One day, a young couple, Mark and Lisa, visited the shop and were immediately drawn to the doll. Despite its unsettling aura, Lisa felt compelled to buy it. Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated but eventually sold it to them, warning them to treat the doll with respect. The couple took the doll home and placed it in their living room. Soon after, strange things began to happen. They would hear footsteps in the middle of the night and find objects moved or broken. The doll seemed to change positions on its own, and its eyes appeared to follow them around the room. Lisa started having vivid nightmares about a little girl crying for help. The dreams were so intense that she began to dread going to sleep. One night, Mark woke up to find Lisa standing in the living room, staring at the doll with a blank expression. When he approached her, she turned to him with a chilling smile and whispered, "She's here." Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and the doll's eyes glowed with a malevolent light. Mark grabbed Lisa and fled the house. Desperate for answers, they returned to Mrs. Hawthorne. She revealed the doll's dark history. It was possessed by the spirit of a vengeful little girl who had died under tragic circumstances. The doll had brought misery to everyone who owned it. Mrs. Hawthorne agreed to take the doll back and perform a ritual to cleanse it. Relieved, the couple returned home, but the nightmare was far from over. The doll had left a mark on Lisa, and she continued to be haunted by the little girl's spirit. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and she felt an unseen presence watching her every move. Eventually, the couple decided to move away, hoping to escape the curse. Even after they left Willow Creek, the hauntings persisted. Lisa's health deteriorated, and she became increasingly paranoid. One night, Mark found her writing in a trance-like state, repeating the words, "She's here." The doll's curse had followed them, and there was no escaping its reach. The cursed doll of Willow Creek remains a legend in the town, a reminder of the dark forces that can reside in seemingly innocent objects. The couple's fate serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of meddling with the unknown. The doll now sits in Mrs. Hawthorne's shop, waiting for its next victim. The chilling phone call from the past. Sarah had always been skeptical of ghost stories, believing they were nothing more than fabrications. However, her perspective changed drastically after a disturbing experience involving an old, unlisted phone number. It all began when Sarah moved into a historic house she inherited from a distant relative. The house, located in a quiet rural town, was charming, but had an unsettling atmosphere. The previous owners had left behind a collection of antique furniture and old records, which Sarah decided to. One evening, while organizing the attic, Sarah discovered an old rotary phone tucked away in a dusty corner. It was an elegant piece with intricate designs and a heavy, glassy receiver. Curious, she decided to plug it in to see if it still worked, but to her surprise, the phone rang shortly after she plugged it in despite the line being disconnected. Answering the phone, Sarah was greeted by a crackling static, followed by a distorted voice that sounded eerily familiar. The voice, though unclear, seemed to be speaking directly to her, asking for help and mentioning her name. The disembodied voice repeated her name with increasing urgency before the call abruptly ended. Confused and a little unnerved, Sarah tried to trace the call but found no record of it. She dismissed it as a prank or a fluke of the old phone's wiring. However, the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Sarah received more calls from the same number, each one featuring the same distorted voice pleading for help. One night, while trying to sleep, Sarah was jolted awake by the sound of her phone ringing. She answered it to hear the same eerie voice, now clearer than before. The voice described a horrific event from the past, detailing the murder of a young woman who had once lived in the house. The details matched a historical account Sarah had read about a crime committed in the home many decades earlier. The voice seemed to be pleading for justice, revealing details only someone intimately connected to the case could know. It told Sarah about a hidden journal and a specific location in the house where crucial evidence was buried. Overcome with fear and curiosity, Sarah followed the instructions and found a hidden compartment beneath the attic floorboards, containing a diary and other documents related to the murder. The diary revealed the tragic story of a young woman named Elizabeth, who had been wrongfully accused and murdered by her jealous husband. The diary described her torment and her desperate plea for someone to remember her and bring her killer to justice. Determined to honor Elizabeth's memory, Sarah contacted local historians and law enforcement with the newly discovered evidence. They were able to use the information to reopen the case and bring closure to Elizabeth's tragic story. Even after the case was resolved, Sarah continued to receive the disturbing phone calls, though they gradually stopped as Elizabeth's spirit seemed to find the phone, now silent, remained a chilling reminder of the past and the supernatural connection that bridged the gap between history and the present. The experience left Sarah profoundly changed, no longer a skeptic but a believer in the eerie and unexplained. The old rotary phone was eventually returned to its place in the attic, a haunting reminder of the chilling phone calls from the past and the ghostly plea for justice.